The morning mist clung to the Rocky Mountain foothills like a shroud, refusing to lift despite the autumn sun's desperate attempts to burn through. Belridge sat nestled in a valley where civilization met wilderness, a town of barely 3,000 souls who preferred it that way. The aspen trees had turned their brilliant gold, creating a tapestry against the dark pines that climbed toward Devil's Peak, a jagged mountain that dominated the northern horizon like a broken tooth. Margaret Kellerman stood at her kitchen window, watching her 8-year-old daughter Emma chase their golden retriever through the backyard. The child's laughter echoed off the surrounding hills, a sound that would haunt Margaret's dreams for decades to come. She didn't know it yet, but in exactly 4 hours and 17 minutes, Emma would vanish without a trace, along with 10 other children from Belridge Elementary. The temperature had dropped to 38 degrees overnight, and frost still glittered on the grass like scattered diamonds. Margaret pulled her cardigan tighter as she called out, "Emma, breakfast." "5 more minutes, Mom." Emma's voice carried on the crisp air, full of the boundless energy that only children possess. Her red ponytail bounced as she threw a stick for Rusty, who bounded after it with equal enthusiasm. Margaret smiled despite her growing unease. Something felt different about this morning, though she couldn't pinpoint what. The usual sounds were there: birds chirping, the distant hum of traffic on Highway 34, the rumble of the school bus warming up at the depot, yet underneath it all lurked a silence that seemed to press against her eardrums. Across town, Detective Raymond Holbrook was already at his desk in the small Belridge Police Department, nursing his 3rd cup of coffee and reviewing the previous night's incident reports. At 42, Holbrook had seen enough in his 15 years of law enforcement to know that small towns weren't immune to darkness. They just hid it better. The reports were routine: a domestic disturbance on Elm Street, teenagers caught drinking behind the old grain elevator, Mrs. Patterson's cat stuck in a tree again. Nothing that suggested the day would become the defining moment of his career, the case that would consume him for the next 26 years. His radio crackled to life. "Ray, you there?" It was dispatch elderly Mrs. Kowalski, who'd been working the phones since Eisenhower was president. "What's up, Dolores?" "Got a call from the elementary school. Principal wants to see you. Says it's urgent." Holbrook frowned. It was only 7:30 a.m. School wouldn't start for another hour. "Any idea what it's about?" "Nope. Just said to get there quick." The Belridge Elementary School sat on Maple Avenue, a red brick building constructed in 1954 that served kindergarten through 6th grade. As Holbrook pulled into the parking lot, he noticed several cars already there, unusual for this early in the morning. Principal Dorothy Westfield met him at the main entrance, her normally composed demeanor cracked with worry. "Thank God you're here, Detective," she said, wringing her hands. "We have a situation." Dorothy Westfield had been principal for 12 years, long enough to handle most crises with calm efficiency. But as she led Holbrook down the polished hallway lined with children's artwork, her voice trembled with barely contained panic. "It started yesterday afternoon," she began. "After school, during our nature club meeting, Mrs. Henderson takes a group of kids up to the observation trail every Friday. It's educational, shows them local wildlife, plant identification, that sort of thing." They stopped outside her office, where through the glass windows, Holbrook could see several adults huddled together, faces etched with concern. He recognized some of them: the Ashfords, whose son Timothy was in 4th grade; Elena Rodriguez, whose daughter Carmen was known for her brilliant smile and perfect attendance; the Brennans, whose twin boys were inseparable. "How many kids were in this group?" Holbrook asked. 11. Dorothy's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "All between 8 and 11 years old. Mrs. Henderson had taken them on this trail dozens of times before. It's safe, well marked, only goes about half a mile up the mountain before circling back." She paused, collecting herself before continuing. "They were supposed to be back by 5 o'clock. When they didn't return by 5:30, I called the sheriff's department. Search and rescue was out there until midnight with flashlights and dogs. Holbrook felt ice forming in his stomach. And they found Mrs. Henderson. The way she said it made Holbrook's blood run cold. Found her how? Dorothy opened her office door, gesturing for him to sit. The parents looked up as they entered, their faces a mixture of exhaustion and terror. Barbara Ashford had been crying. Her eyes were red and swollen. Miguel Rodriguez sat ramrod straight, his jaw clenched so tight Holbrook could see the muscles working beneath his skin. Mrs. Henderson was discovered at approximately 11:47 p.m. Dorothy continued, her voice taking on the formal tone she used during emergency announcements. She was found unconscious at the base of Devil's Drop. That's a cliff face about 2 miles off the main trail. 2 miles. Holbrook's detective instincts kicked in. Why would an elementary school nature group go 2 miles off a marked trail? That's just it. They wouldn't. Mrs. Henderson was one of our most experienced teachers. She's been leading these groups for 8 years, without incident. She knows those trails better than anyone. Barbara Ashford stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. Where is my son? Her voice cracked. Where is Timothy? Elena Rodriguez reached over and squeezed Barbara's hand. They'll find them, she whispered, though her own voice betrayed her doubt. Holbrook studied the faces around him. 11 families, 11 children, all vanished in the span of a few hours. In his experience, group disappearances usually fell into a few categories: natural disaster, accident, or something far more sinister. Is Mrs. Henderson conscious now? Can she tell us what happened? Dorothy shook her head gravely. She's in a coma at Denver General. The doctors say she has severe head trauma, consistent with a fall. But detective, there's something else. She walked to her desk and pulled out a manila folder. The search and rescue team found these scattered around where Mrs. Henderson was discovered. She handed him the folder. Inside were photographs of children's belongings: a small pink backpack, a pair of sneakers, a thermos with cartoon characters on it. But what caught Holbrook's attention wasn't what was there, but what wasn't. These items, he said slowly, they're all damaged, torn, scattered, like they were. He paused, not wanting to voice his growing suspicion in front of the parents. Like they were dropped during a struggle. Dorothy finished quietly. The room fell silent, except for the steady tick of the wall clock. Outside, the morning mist was finally beginning to lift, revealing the ominous silhouette of Devil's Peak in the distance. James Brennan, father of the missing twins, spoke for the first time. Detective, you need to understand something about our kids. They're not the type to wander off. Timothy Ashford has been hiking these mountains since he could walk. Carmen Rodriguez could navigate these trails blindfolded. My boys, they're good kids, responsible kids. His wife nodded emphatically. Something happened up there. Something bad. Holbrook closed the folder and stood. I need to see the scene. Who's the best person to guide me up there? That would be Jake Morrison, Dorothy replied. He's our groundskeeper, but he also volunteers with search and rescue, knows every inch of these mountains. 20 minutes later, Holbrook found himself in Morrison's battered pickup truck, winding up a narrow dirt road that climbed steadily toward the tree line. Morrison was a man of few words, his weathered face speaking of decades spent outdoors. He wore the expression of someone who'd seen things he'd rather forget. Been living in these mountains for 37 years, Morrison said as they bounced over a pothole. Never seen anything like this. What do you mean? Morrison was quiet for a long moment, navigating around a fallen branch. The animals, he finally said. They're all wrong. Wrong how? Spooked. Agitated. This morning I saw a whole herd of elk running down from the high country, like something was chasing them. Birds aren't singing right either. It's like the whole mountain is disturbed. They parked at a small clearing, where the dirt road ended. From here, a well-maintained trail led into the forest. marked with wooden signs indicating it was the Belridge Elementary Nature Trail. But they weren't taking that path. Morrison shouldered a backpack and handed Holbrook a spare. "Where we're going is about a 40-minute hike through some rough terrain. You sure you're up for it?" Holbrook had been asking himself the same question. His last serious hike had been 3 years ago, and his desk job had added 15 pounds to his frame. But 11 children were missing, and he'd crawl on his hands and knees if necessary. Lead the way. The forest closed around them like a living thing. Towering pines filtered the sunlight into scattered beams that illuminated patches of the forest floor. The air smelled of pine needles and decomposing leaves, with an underlying odor that Holbrook couldn't identify. Something metallic and unpleasant. As they climbed higher, Morrison pointed out landmarks and explained the geography. "The kids' nature trail follows this ridge here," he said, gesturing to their left. "It's maybe a quarter-mile that way, clearly marked, safe as houses. But Mrs. Henderson was found way over there." He pointed to a rocky outcropping visible through the trees. "That's Devil's Drop. No reason for anyone to be up there, especially not with a group of kids." They hiked in relative silence, the only sounds their breathing and the crunch of leaves underfoot. But as they got closer to Devil's Drop, Morrison stopped abruptly. "You hear that?" he whispered. Holbrook strained his ears. At first he heard nothing unusual, the whisper of wind through the pines, the distant call of a hawk. Then he caught it, a sound so faint he almost missed it. Humming. A child's voice. Humming a tune he couldn't identify. "Jesus," Morrison breathed. "That's coming from up ahead." They moved forward cautiously, following the sound. The forest seemed to grow darker with each step, the canopy above blocking out more and more sunlight. The humming grew clearer, and Holbrook realized it was the tune to ring around the rosy, innocent and haunting in the mountain silence. They crested a small rise and found themselves looking down into a circular clearing, perhaps 50 feet across. At the center stood a massive granite boulder, easily 20 feet high, covered in what looked like ancient markings or symbols. But what made Holbrook's blood run cold wasn't the rock itself. It was the circle of children's backpacks arranged around it in a perfect ring. "Mother of God," Morrison whispered. Holbrook counted them quickly. 11 backpacks, each placed with deliberate precision, each facing the central boulder like worshippers at an altar. The humming had stopped, leaving only an oppressive silence that seemed to press down on them from all sides. But the children were nowhere to be seen. Morrison started toward the clearing, but Holbrook grabbed his arm. "Wait, this is a crime scene now. We can't contaminate it." "But the kids aren't here." Holbrook's voice was grim. "And this," he gestured toward the ritualistic arrangement, "this wasn't done by children." They stood at the edge of the clearing for several minutes, taking in every detail. The backpacks appeared undamaged, unlike the scattered items found near Mrs. Henderson. They were arranged with mathematical precision, each exactly the same distance from the boulder, each facing the same direction. The boulder itself seemed to draw the eye, its surface covered in symbols that definitely weren't natural rock formations. Some looked almost Native American, others resembled nothing Holbrook had ever seen. At the base of the rock, the ground was disturbed, not by footprints but by something else entirely. "Jake," Holbrook said quietly, "you know anything about this rock? These symbols?" Morrison shook his head slowly. "Been hiking these mountains my whole life. Never seen this clearing before, which is impossible because I know every trail, every ridge, every goddamn tree in a 10-mile radius." "What do you mean you've never seen it?" "I mean it wasn't here yesterday." Morrison's voice was barely above a whisper. "I came through this area just last week, checking for storm damage. This clearing, this rock, none of it was here." A chill ran down Holbrook's spine that had nothing to do with the mountain air. He pulled out his radio, grateful to get a signal despite their elevation. "Dispatch, this is Holbrook. I need a full crime scene team up here, and I need them now. Also, Contact the FBI field office in Denver. Tell them we have a potential child abduction case. Multiple victims. Copy that, Detective. ETA on the crime scene team. Holbrook looked around the impossible clearing, at the ancient symbols on a rock that supposedly hadn't existed a week ago, at the perfectly arranged backpacks of 11 missing children. Tell them to hurry, Dolores, and tell them to bring everything they've got. As they waited for backup, Holbrook walked the perimeter of the clearing, careful not to disturb potential evidence. The more he observed, the more questions arose. The symbols on the boulder were definitely carved, not painted, and they had the weathered look of extreme age. But if Morrison was right about the clearing not being here before, how was that possible? Morrison stood guard at the opposite side, his face pale. "Detective," he called out, "you need to see this." Holbrook made his way around to where Morrison was standing. The groundskeeper was staring at a section of disturbed earth near the tree line. At first glance, it looked like normal forest floor. Fallen leaves, pine needles, scattered twigs. But when Holbrook looked closer, he could see the pattern Morrison had noticed. Footprints. Dozens of them. But they weren't the sneaker prints you'd expect from elementary school children. These were bare feet, adult-sized, pressed deep into the soft earth. They formed a rough circle around the entire clearing, as if a group of people had been walking or dancing around the perimeter. "How many you think?" Morrison asked. Holbrook counted carefully, following the trail of prints. At least 20, maybe more. Hard to tell where one set ends and another begin. But where did they go? The prints just stopped. Morrison was right. The footprints ended abruptly at the edge of the tree line, as if the people making them had simply vanished into thin air. There were no corresponding prints leading away from the clearing. No disturbance in the surrounding vegetation that would indicate people passing through. The radio crackled to life. "Detective Holbrook, this is Chief Patterson. What's your status?" Chief Patterson was Holbrook's supervisor, a political appointee who preferred handling parking tickets to actual police work. His presence on the radio meant word was already spreading through the department. "Chief, I'm at a secondary crime scene approximately 2 miles northeast of the elementary school trail. I need that crime scene team, and I need them yesterday." "What exactly are we looking at here, Ray?" Holbrook hesitated, trying to find words that wouldn't sound insane. 11 missing children, 1 teacher in a coma, and evidence of organized activity at the scene. "Organized how?" "I'll brief you when you get here, Chief. Just make sure that FBI contact happens. This is bigger than anything Belridge has ever dealt with." While they waited, Morrison shared what he knew about the local history. "These mountains have always had stories," he said, settling against a tree trunk. "Native Americans considered this area sacred, but also dangerous. They called Devil's Peak by another name, something that translates to place where the earth dreams." "Meaning what?" "Hell if I know. But the old-timers in town, the families who've been here since the mining days, they all have stories. Strange disappearances, people seeing things that shouldn't be there, hearing voices in the wind. You ever see anything like that?" Morrison was quiet for a long moment. "Once," he admitted. "About 10 years ago, I was up here hunting. Got turned around somehow. Ended up in a part of the mountains I didn't recognize. Found myself in a clearing not unlike this one, with a rock formation covered in symbols. The crime scene team arrived 2 hours later, led by Detective Sarah Vance from the state police. Vance was a no-nonsense investigator in her late 30s, with the kind of methodical approach that had solved dozens of difficult cases. She took one look at the clearing and immediately understood the gravity of the situation. "This is definitely organized," she said after surveying the scene. "The backpack placement is too precise to be random. And these symbols." She photographed each marking on the boulder from multiple angles. While the crime scene team worked, Holbrook hiked back down to coordinate with the parents and media, who were already beginning to gather in town. The story was spreading fast, 11 children vanished without a trace. Their teacher found unconscious miles from where they should have been. By evening, Belridge was transformed. News vans lined Main Street, their satellite dishes reaching toward the darkening sky like mechanical sunflowers. Reporters pressed against police barriers, shouting questions at anyone in uniform. Barbara Ashford approached Holbrook as he entered the cafeteria. "Detective, please. It's been 12 hours. What can you tell us?" "We're following several leads," he said carefully. "The FBI is sending a team from Denver, and we have search and rescue crews working through the night. But you found something up there, didn't you?" This from Elena Rodriguez, her voice sharp with intuition. "The way you looked when you came back, you found something." Before Holbrook could respond, his radio crackled with an urgent message from Detective Vance at the crime scene. "Ray, you need to get back up here. Now." "What is it?" "The backpacks. They're gone." A collective gasp went through the cafeteria as the parents overheard the transmission. Holbrook stepped outside to continue the conversation. "What do you mean, gone?" "I mean vanished. All 11 of them. We had the scene secured, 2 officers standing guard, and when we went to collect the evidence, there was nothing there. Just empty spaces where they'd been sitting." Holbrook felt the case slipping away from him like sand through his fingers. "Any signs of disturbance, footprints?" "That's the thing, Ray. The ground shows no signs of anyone approaching the backpacks. It's like they just evaporated." As Holbrook stared up at Devil's Peak, now silhouetted against the star-filled sky, he realized they weren't dealing with a conventional kidnapping. Something else was at work in these mountains, something that defied rational explanation. And somewhere out there, 11 children were depending on him to find answers. The first day of the Belridge case was ending, but Detective Raymond Holbrook knew it was only the beginning of a nightmare that would haunt him for the next 26 years. The mountain held its secrets close, and as the wind whistled down from Devil's Peak, carrying with it the faint sound of children's laughter that might have been just his imagination, Holbrook made a promise to those missing children and their families. He would find the truth, no matter how long it took, no matter how impossible that truth might be. Detective Raymond Holbrook hadn't slept in 36 hours, but sleep was the furthest thing from his mind as he stood in the hospital corridor outside Martha Henderson's room. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in a sickly pale glow that made the world feel unreal. Through the window he could see the teacher's still form connected to a maze of tubes and wires, her chest rising and falling with mechanical precision. Dr. Amanda Cross emerged from the room, pulling off her latex gloves with the weary motion of someone who'd delivered too much bad news. She was young for a neurosurgeon, probably mid-30s, with prematurely gray hair that spoke of the stress that came with holding lives in her hands. "Any change?" Holbrook asked, though her expression already told him the answer. "I'm afraid not. The brain trauma is extensive. We've reduced the swelling, but..." She paused, studying the chart in her hands. "Detective, I need to ask you something about the circumstances of Mrs. Henderson's fall." "Go ahead." "The injury pattern is unusual. Most fall victims who hit their head on rocks show impact damage consistent with the angle and force of the fall. But Mrs. Henderson's injuries..." Dr. Cross moved to a wall-mounted light box and clipped up a series of X-rays. "Look at this." She pointed to a series of dark lines across the skull X-ray. "These fractures form an almost perfect geometric pattern. I've been practicing medicine for 12 years, and I've never seen anything like it. It's as if something carved these lines into her skull rather than them being caused by impact trauma." Holbrook studied the X-rays, his stomach tightening. The fracture lines did indeed form a pattern, not random cracks from hitting a rock, but deliberate marks that resembled the symbols they'd found carved into the boulder. "Doctor, is there any chance she might regain consciousness? Even briefly?" "It's possible, but unlikely in the next few days. However, there is something else. She's been talking." "Talking? I thought she was in a coma." "She is, but she's been mumbling words, fragments of sentences. The nurses have been keeping notes. Dr. Cross handed him a folded piece of paper. Most of it's incoherent, but there are recurring phrases. Holbrook unfolded the paper and read the scrawled handwriting. The children are singing below the roots. 7 circles deeper. They're waiting for the door to open. The sleepers are waking. Don't let them count to 13. A chill ran down his spine. Has she said anything about what happened up there? About who might have taken the kids? That's just it. Detective, according to her mumblings, the children weren't taken. They went willingly. Before Holbrook could process this fully, his radio buzzed with an urgent message from the crime scene. Detective Vance's voice was tight with barely controlled panic. Ray, you need to get up here immediately. We've got a situation. 20 minutes later, Holbrook was back on the mountain following his flashlight beam through the pre-dawn darkness. The crime scene lights created an island of harsh illumination in the forest, and as he approached the clearing, he could see the silhouettes of the forensics team huddled together like they were seeking protection in numbers. Detective Vance met him at the tree line, her face pale in the artificial light. It started about an hour ago, she said without preamble. The ground began vibrating, just slightly at first, like a minor earthquake. Then the symbols on the boulder started glowing. Glowing? I know how it sounds, but we all saw it. A faint blue light emanating from the carved marks. And then, she paused, collecting herself. Then we heard them. Heard what? The children. Singing. As if summoned by her words, a sound drifted through the forest. Faint, ethereal, but unmistakably the voices of children singing in harmony. The melody was hauntingly beautiful, but completely unfamiliar, rising and falling in patterns that seemed to bypass the ears and resonate directly in the chest. Jesus Christ, Holbrook whispered. The forensics photographer, a veteran named Tom Gallagher, who documented crime scenes for 20 years, approached them with his camera in hand. Detective, you need to see what we captured on film. He showed them the digital display on his camera, scrolling through a series of photos taken throughout the night. The early images showed the empty clearing, the boulder, the disturbed ground where the backpacks had been. But in the later photos, strange anomalies began to appear. Look at this one, taken at 2:15 a.m., Gallagher said. The photo showed the clearing, but superimposed over the normal scene were translucent figures, children, but not quite solid, like double-exposed film. They appeared to be holding hands in a circle around the boulder. And this one, 15 minutes later. In the next image, the ghostly figures were clearer, more defined. Holbrook could make out individual faces. Timothy Ashford, his gap-toothed smile visible even in the ethereal image. Carmen Rodriguez, her dark hair flowing as if underwater. The Brennan twins, still inseparable even in whatever state they now existed. They're not dead, Vance said quietly. Whatever happened to them, they're not dead. Holbrook studied the photos, his rational mind warring with the evidence before his eyes. Could this be some kind of camera malfunction? Double exposure? Gallagher shook his head. I thought the same thing. But look at this. He showed them his equipment. A professional digital camera with no film to double expose. Besides, we've all seen them with our naked eyes. Brief glimpses. Just at the edge of vision, but they're there. The singing grew louder, and now Holbrook could make out words, though they were in no language he recognized. The melody seemed to pull at something deep in his consciousness, awakening memories he was certain he'd never made. Agent Diana Foster arrived at dawn, leading a team of 3 FBI specialists. Foster was a legend in the Bureau, known for solving cases that other agents wouldn't touch. The weird ones, the cases that defied conventional explanation. She was tall and angular, with steel-gray hair and eyes that seemed to see through everything. Detective Holbrook, she said, extending a firm handshake. I've read your preliminary report. 11 missing children, ritual elements, impossible evidence. Right up my alley. She surveyed the crime scene with the practiced eye of someone who'd seen things that most people couldn't imagine. When she approached the boulder, however, she stopped dead in her tracks. "Well, I'll be damned," she muttered. Agent Foster? Holbrook joined her beside the massive stone. "These symbols, I've seen them before." She pulled out a small notebook and began sketching the markings. 3 years ago, outside Flagstaff, Arizona, 7 children disappeared during a school camping trip. We found similar symbols carved into rocks at the scene. Similar or identical? Identical, down to the smallest detail. Foster's expression was grim. The case was never solved. The children were never found. But we did learn something about the symbols. She finished her sketch and showed it to Holbrook. According to a linguistics professor at Northern Arizona University, these markings predate any known Native American writing system. They're older than anything that should exist in North America, possibly older than recorded human civilization. That's impossible. So are glowing rocks and disappearing evidence. But here we are. Foster pocketed her notebook. "Detective, I need you to understand something. This isn't your typical kidnapping case. The Bureau has a small, unofficial task force that handles cases like this, incidents that fall outside normal parameters. We call them anomalous events." "How many cases are we talking about?" "In the past decade, 47 documented incidents across North America, all involving children, all with similar elements. Ancient symbols, ritual arrangements, witnesses reporting impossible phenomena." As they spoke, more personnel arrived. Dr. Marcus Everett, an anthropologist from the University of Colorado, came to study the symbols. Dr. Lisa Chang, a geologist, was brought in to examine the rock formation itself. And perhaps most unusually, Dr. Benjamin Thorne, who introduced himself simply as a specialist in historical anomalies. Dr. Thorne was an elderly man with wild white hair and eyes that sparkled with barely contained excitement. He examined the boulder for nearly an hour, taking measurements and photographs, occasionally making notes in a leather-bound journal. "Fascinating," he finally announced. "The stone itself is granite, common to this region. But the symbols," he traced one of the markings with his finger, "they show evidence of tool marks that predate any known cutting implements, and the wear patterns suggest these carvings are at least 1,000 years old. But that's impossible." Detective Vance interjected. "The groundskeeper says this clearing didn't exist a week ago." Dr. Thorne smiled mysteriously. But what if the clearing didn't appear? What if we simply became able to see it?" Before anyone could ask what he meant, a commotion erupted from the tree line. Jake Morrison came crashing through the underbrush, his face wild with panic. "Detective, you need to come quickly. We found something." They followed Morrison down a steep slope to a section of forest they hadn't explored before. Hidden beneath a fallen log was what appeared to be a cave entrance, barely large enough for a person to crawl through. "This wasn't here yesterday," Morrison insisted. "I've been through this area 100 times. This cave just appeared." Agent Foster examined the entrance with her flashlight. "The opening looks natural, but recently disturbed. Someone's been through here. Or something," Dr. Thorne added ominously. Against protocol and better judgment, Holbrook squeezed through the cave entrance, followed by Foster and Morrison. The passage opened into a larger chamber after about 20 feet of crawling, and when they emerged, their flashlight beams revealed something that defied explanation. The chamber was huge, easily the size of a gymnasium, with walls covered in the same symbols they'd found on the boulder above. But these were different somehow, more complex, arranged in patterns that seemed to tell a story, and scattered throughout the chamber were hundreds of children's belongings, shoes, toys, clothing, all arranged in careful groupings. "My God," Foster whispered. "How many children have been taken?" But it was Morrison who made the most disturbing discovery. In an alcove at the far end of the chamber, he found a series of stone tablets covered in more symbols. Unlike the others, these markings seemed to pulse with their own faint light. Dr. Thorne examined the tablets with trembling hands. "It's a record," he said, his voice barely audible. "A history of harvests." Harvests? The symbols tell of children being taken, year after year, century after century, always 11 at a time, always during the autumn equinox. They're taken to feed something. Feed what? Before Dr. Thorne could answer, the chamber filled with the sound of children's voices, not singing this time, but calling out, their voices echoing from deeper in the cave system. "Help us, we're so far down. The sleepers are waking. Don't let them reach 13. Holbrook recognized the voices immediately. Timothy Ashford, Carmen Rodriguez, the Brennan twins. They were alive, somewhere deeper in the mountain. "We need a full rescue team," Foster said. But even as she spoke, the cave entrance behind them began to narrow, as if the mountain itself was sealing them in. They managed to squeeze back through the shrinking opening just as it closed completely, leaving behind only solid rock where moments before there had been a cave entrance. Back at the surface, the investigation took on a new urgency. While Agent Foster coordinated with the FBI's specialist teams, Holbrook returned to town to brief the families. The parents deserved to know that their children were alive, even if the circumstances were beyond comprehension. The community center had been converted into a makeshift command post, with FBI agents manning phones and computers while the families waited for news. When Holbrook entered, the conversations died, and 11 sets of desperate eyes turned to him. "We believe the children are alive," he announced, and the relief in the room was palpable. Barbara Ashford began crying, not from despair this time, but from hope. "Where are they?" Elena Rodriguez asked. "Can we get them back?" "That's what we're working on. But I need to be honest with you. The situation is complex. We're dealing with something that doesn't fit normal patterns." James Brennan stood up, his face hard with determination. "Then we'll deal with it abnormally, whatever it takes." As Holbrook continued briefing the families, Dr. Thorne was making a discovery that would change everything they thought they knew about the case. Hidden in the town's historical society archives, he found a series of newspaper clippings dating back to "Children vanish from mining camp. 11 youngsters disappeared during autumn celebration. Strange lights seen over Devil's Peak. Miners report unexplained phenomena. Search abandoned for missing children. Rescue teams refused to continue after unnatural encounters." The pattern went back over a century. Every 11 years, like clockwork, children disappeared in the Belridge area. Always 11 children. Always in October. Always near Devil's Peak. But Dr. Thorne's most chilling discovery was a journal entry from 1969, written by a survivor, a 12-year-old girl named Rebecca Walsh, who had somehow escaped after being taken with 10 other children. Her account, written in a child's shaky handwriting, described being led through underground passages by the singing shadows to a vast chamber where something ancient waited. She wrote of other children from past years, still alive but changed, their eyes holding depths that human eyes shouldn't possess. "They're not just taking them," Dr. Thorne explained to the assembled team as night fell on the second day. "They're collecting them, building something. And according to these records, 1992 marks the end of a cycle that began over 1,000 years ago." "What kind of cycle?" Foster asked. Dr. Thorne's face was grave as he consulted his notes. 13 harvests, 11 children each time, taken every 11 years. This is the 13th harvest, and according to the symbols, when the 13th harvest is complete, something that has been sleeping will wake. "The sleepers Mrs. Henderson mentioned?" "I believe so, and if my translation is correct, once they wake, they won't just be taking 11 children every 11 years. They'll be taking them all." As if to emphasize his point, the lights in the town below began flickering, and a low humming sound rose from the direction of Devil's Peak. In houses throughout Belridge, children woke from nightmares they couldn't remember, and parents found themselves standing at windows, staring up at the mountain where strange lights danced among the stars. The second day of the Belridge case was ending, but Detective Raymond Holbrook knew the real terror was just beginning. Somewhere beneath Devil's Peak, 11 children were waiting for rescue, unaware that they were part of a pattern that stretched back through centuries. And something ancient was stirring in the depths, counting down to the moment when it would finally wake. Time was running out, and with each passing hour, the mountain's hold on the children grew stronger. The question was no longer just how to save 11 missing kids. It was how to prevent something unspeakable from awakening and claiming every child in Belridge. As Holbrook looked up at Devil's Peak, now pulsing with an otherworldly glow, he made a silent promise. Whatever was down there, whatever had been sleeping for 1,000 years, he would find a way to stop it, even if it cost him everything. 2 minutes before midnight on the third day, the mountain began to sing. Detective Raymond Holbrook stood with Agent Foster and Dr. Thorne at the edge of the clearing, watching as the massive boulder pulsed with an ethereal blue light that grew brighter with each passing second. The symbols carved into its surface seemed to writhe and dance, rearranging themselves into new patterns that hurt to look at directly. "It's starting," Dr. Thorne whispered, his voice barely audible over the harmonic vibrations emanating from deep within Devil's Peak. "The 13th harvest is about to be complete." Throughout Belridge, every child under the age of 12 had fallen into a deep, unnatural sleep at exactly 11:47 p.m. Parents frantically shook their sons and daughters, but nothing could wake them. The children lay still as dolls, their faces serene but their eyes moving rapidly beneath closed lids, as if watching something the adults couldn't see. The FBI command post buzzed with panicked radio chatter from across the region. Reports were flooding in from towns within a 100-mile radius, children falling asleep simultaneously, strange lights visible on distant mountains, electronic equipment failing without explanation. "Agent Foster," came the urgent voice of Special Agent Martinez over the radio. "We've got the same phenomena reported in Wyoming, New Mexico, and Utah. Whatever's happening in Belridge, it's spreading." Foster pressed the radio to her mouth, her face grim. "Copy that. Any sign of the sleeping children waking?" "Negative. But we're getting reports of children sleepwalking. Hundreds of them, all heading toward the nearest mountain peaks." Holbrook felt his blood turn to ice. The scope of what they were dealing with was beyond anything he'd imagined. This wasn't just about 11 missing children from Belridge. It was about every child in the American West. Dr. Thorne consulted his translation notes with trembling hands. According to the tablet inscriptions, when the 13th harvest begins, all children will be called to join the sleepers. They'll walk through the night, drawn by the ancient song, until they reach the sacred places where the sleepers wait. "How do we stop it?" Holbrook demanded. "The tablets suggest there's a way to break the cycle, but it requires—" Dr. Thorne paused, his face pale. "It requires someone to take the place of the 13 harvests. One soul, willingly given, to seal the sleepers for another 1,000 years." Before anyone could process this fully, a new voice cut through the night air. Not the ethereal singing of the missing children, but something deeper, older, speaking in harmonics that seemed to bypass the ears and resonate directly in their bones. "The time of awakening is at hand. The children of the surface world shall join their brothers and sisters in the deep places. The great dreaming shall end, and the new age shall begin." The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, carried on wind that tasted of centuries-old earth, and something metallic that made their teeth ache. As it spoke, the ground beneath their feet began to vibrate, and cracks appeared in the rocky soil around the boulder. "The cave entrance," Morrison called out from across the clearing. "It's opening again." Indeed, the passage they discovered the day before was widening, stone flowing like liquid to create an opening large enough for several people to pass through at once. From within came a soft, welcoming light and the sound of children's voices calling out in desperate harmony. "Mum, Dad, we're here. Please come find us." Timothy Ashford's voice, clear as day, Carmen Rodriguez calling for her parents. The Brennan twins, their voices overlapping as they pleaded for rescue. Barbara Ashford broke away from the FBI perimeter before anyone could stop her, running toward the cave entrance. "Timothy, Mommy's coming!" "Wait!" Foster shouted, but it was too late. Barbara disappeared into the glowing passage, and immediately her screams echoed back. Not screams of pain, but of terror at what she was seeing. Holbrook didn't hesitate. He grabbed his flashlight and pistol and plunged into the cave after her, followed closely by Foster and Morrison. Dr. Thorne, despite his age, wasn't far behind. The passage had changed since their previous exploration. Instead of the narrow crawlway, it now opened into a wide corridor with walls that seemed to pulse with their own bioluminescent light. The symbols carved into the stone were more complex here, telling a story that unfolded as they moved deeper into the mountain. They found Barbara Ashford 50 feet into the corridor, standing frozen with her hand pressed to her mouth. Before them opened a vast underground cathedral, its ceiling lost in shadows far above. But it wasn't the size of the chamber that had stopped her in her tracks. It was the children. Hundreds of them filled the chamber, arranged in concentric circles around a central platform. Some Holbrook recognized from the recent disappearance: Timothy, Carmen, the Brennan twins, all the missing children from Belridge Elementary. But there were others, many others, wearing clothing from different decades, different centuries. The children from the 1981 harvest stood in the innermost circle, their eyes holding depths that no child's eyes should possess. Behind them, the children from 1970, then 1959, going back and back until the outermost circles held children in clothing from the pioneer era, their faces serene but ancient. None of them had aged a day from when they were taken. "Jesus Christ," Foster whispered. "How many are there?" Dr. Thorne was frantically counting, his lips moving silently as he tallied the circles. 13 harvests, he finally said. 143 children, taken over the course of 132 years. At the center of the chamber, on a raised stone platform, lay 3 figures that definitely weren't human. They were tall, nearly 8 feet, with elongated limbs and skin that seemed translucent in the strange light. Their faces were almost human but wrong somehow, as if shaped by someone who had only heard descriptions of what people looked like. The sleepers, and they were beginning to wake. As the FBI team watched in horror, the figures on the platform began to stir. Their eyes opened, not human eyes, but orbs of swirling darkness that seemed to contain entire galaxies. When they sat up, their movements were fluid, graceful, but utterly alien. The children in the circles began to sing again, their voices joining in harmonies that made the air itself vibrate. But now Holbrook could understand the words, as if the language was being translated directly into his consciousness. "Welcome the awakening children of Earth. Welcome the new masters, the ancient dreams. The time of hiding is ended. The time of ruling begins." "We're too late," Dr. Thorne breathed. "The sleepers are awake. The cycle can't be broken now." But Barbara Ashford had other ideas. With a mother's desperate courage, she broke away from the group and ran toward the circles of children, calling her son's name. "Timothy, Timothy, come to Mommy." The nearest sleeper turned its impossible gaze toward her, and when it spoke, its voice was like wind through a graveyard. "The mother seeks her offspring, but the child belongs to us now. They all belong to us." Timothy Ashford turned toward his mother, and when Holbrook saw the boy's eyes, his heart broke. They held the same galactic depths as the sleepers. Still Timothy, but something else as well. Something vast and patient and utterly inhuman. "I can't come home, Mum," Timothy said, his 8-year-old voice carrying impossible sadness. "We're part of something bigger now. We've seen the deep places, the spaces between the stars. We can't go back to being just children." But as the boy spoke, Holbrook noticed something the sleepers had missed. The children from the most recent harvest, The 11 from Belridge Elementary, their eyes weren't completely changed yet. There was still humanity there, still hope. Dr. Thorne, he whispered urgently. The newest children, they're not fully converted yet. Is there still time? The old professor studied the children with new hope. Yes, the transformation takes time. If we can disrupt the ceremony before it's complete, how? Dr. Thorne pulled out the stone tablet he'd photographed earlier, consulting his translation notes. The ritual requires willing participation. If even one child refuses to join the sleepers, the ceremony fails and they must wait another cycle. But convincing a terrified child to resist the overwhelming influence of beings that had existed since before human civilization would be nearly impossible. Unless Martha Henderson appeared at the entrance to the chamber, leaning heavily on Agent Martinez for support. The teacher had awakened from her coma just an hour earlier, demanding to be brought to the mountain despite her injuries. Mrs. Henderson, Holbrook called out, "You shouldn't be here." "These are my students," she replied, her voice weak but determined. "I lost them. I have to bring them home." She walked slowly into the chamber, and as she did, something remarkable happened. The children from the recent harvest began to turn toward her, recognition dawning in their still human eyes. "Mrs. Henderson," Carmen Rodriguez called out, "you came for us." "We knew you would," added one of the Brennan twins. The sleepers rose from their platform, towering over the small group of humans. Their voices joined in a harmonic that made the cave walls tremble. "The teacher is broken. Her mind touched our realm and was damaged. She cannot interfere." But Martha Henderson had spent her career reaching children others had given up on. Brain damage or not, she knew her students, and they knew her. "Children," she said, her voice carrying despite its weakness. "Do you remember the first thing I taught you about nature walks? What do we always do when we're lost in the woods?" Timothy Ashford's face scrunched in concentration, fighting against the alien influence in his mind. We stay together. We take care of each other." "That's right. And what else?" This time it was Carmen who answered, her voice growing stronger. "We find our way home. We never give up trying to find our way home." The sleepers' harmonics grew more urgent, more demanding. Several of the children from earlier harvests began swaying, their eyes losing focus as they fell deeper under the aliens' control. But the 11 from Belridge Elementary were fighting back, clinging to their teacher's voice like a lifeline. "I want to go home," whispered little Amy Chen, the youngest of the missing children. "I want my mummy." "We all want to go home," Timothy said. And for the first time in 3 days, he sounded like a real 8-year-old boy instead of something ancient wearing a child's face. The lead sleeper let out a sound that was part shriek, part harmony, part something that had no human equivalent. "They are ours. The harvest is complete. They cannot refuse us now." But Dr. Thorne was already moving, pulling the stone tablet from his bag. "The ritual can be broken," he shouted over the alien cacophony. "But someone has to take their place. Someone has to willingly join the sleepers to seal them for another 1,000 years. "I'll do it," Holbrook said without hesitation. "No," Martha Henderson stepped forward, her damaged mind still functioning with a teacher's clarity. "They're my students, my responsibility." "The teacher cannot serve," the sleeper hissed. "Her mind is already touched by our realm. The sacrifice must be pure, untainted." Foster raised her weapon, though she knew bullets would be useless against beings that had survived for millennia. "Then you'll have to settle for none of them." But it was Barbara Ashford who made the choice that changed everything. The desperate mother walked to the center of the chamber, placing herself between the sleepers and all the children. Not just her son, but all 143 victims of the harvest. "Take me instead," she said simply. "I'll stay in their place. All of them. Let all the children go home." The sleepers considered this, their alien minds processing concepts of sacrifice and love that they found fascinating but incomprehensible. Finally, the leader spoke. one adult for 143 children. The mathematics are acceptable, but the exchange must be willing, complete, and permanent. You will join us in the deep places between sleeping and waking. Your consciousness will expand to encompass eons. You will become as we are. Barbara looked back at her son, memorizing his face one last time. Timothy, you take care of the other children, okay? Help them get home safe. Mom, no. Timothy broke away from the circle, running toward her. I won't let you. But as he ran, something extraordinary happened. The other 10 children from Belridge Elementary followed him, their loyalty to each other overriding the alien influence. They formed a protective circle around Barbara Ashford, holding hands and facing outward toward the sleepers. We stay together, Carmen Rodriguez said, echoing Mrs. Henderson's teaching. We take care of each other, and we find our way home, added Timothy, his eyes now completely clear of alien influence. The children from the earlier harvests began to stir, some of them remembering what it felt like to be human. A few from the most recent decades stepped forward, their own humanity fighting against years of conditioning. The sleepers realized their mistake too late. By threatening the mother figure, they had awakened the protective instincts that made humans dangerous even to beings with vast cosmic power. The children weren't just refusing to join them, they were actively fighting back. The harvest is corrupted, the lead sleeper announced, its voice carrying tones of something that might have been respect. The cycle must begin again. We return to the deep places to wait. Not this time, Dr. Thorne said, stepping forward with the stone tablet. The prophecy speaks of breaking the cycle entirely. 13 harvests ending in willing sacrifice, but not the sacrifice they expected. He began to read from the tablet, his voice growing stronger as the ancient words flowed. The symbols on the chamber walls began to glow, but instead of the cold blue light they'd seen before, this was warm, golden, human. The children choose their own path, he continued. They reject the deep places and embrace the light. The sleepers return to their eternal rest, sealed not by sacrifice but by the power of human will, human love, human courage. The sleepers let out one final harmonic, not of anger or frustration, but of something approaching admiration. They had existed for millennia, collecting and studying humanity, but they had never truly understood the bonds that held human families and communities together. As they faded back into the deep places of the mountain, their parting words echoed through the chamber. You are more than we calculated. Perhaps that is why you inherited this world, and we did not. The children from the 13 harvests began to move toward the chamber exit, led by Mrs. Henderson and the 11 from Belridge Elementary. As they walked, those who had been changed by years of alien influence slowly returned to their human selves, their cosmic awareness fading to leave only the memories of childhood, interrupted but not destroyed. Detective Raymond Holbrook stood in the Belridge Elementary School parking lot, watching as 143 children were reunited with families they thought they'd lost forever. Some of those families had been waiting only 3 days, others had been waiting over a century, their descendants gathering to meet great-great-grandparents who were still 8 years old. The logistics would be impossible to explain to the outside world. The FBI was already crafting cover stories about a massive cave-in that had trapped the children in underground chambers, their survival a miracle of human endurance and community support. Thorne's research would be classified, filed away in the same archives that held similar cases from across the world. Mrs. Henderson returned to teaching the following month, though she never spoke publicly about her 3 days in the coma. Her students noticed that she seemed different, more patient, more understanding, as if she'd gained perspective on what really mattered in life. Agent Foster was promoted to head the FBI's unofficial anomalous events division, spending the rest of her career investigating cases that fell outside normal parameters. She never encountered anything quite like the Belridge case again, though she often wondered if the mysterious stone tablets Dr. Thorne had found were still hidden somewhere in the mountain. Dr. Thorne published a paper on mythological patterns in Native American folklore that became required reading in anthropology courses. Though he never revealed his sources, he spent his remaining years traveling to locations where similar symbols had been reported, working quietly to ensure that other sleepers remained undisturbed. Detective Raymond Holbrook, now retired, returned to Belridge for the first time in 26 years. The town had grown. What was once a population of 3,000 was now pushing 8,000, with new subdivisions creeping up the mountain slopes, but Devil's Peak remained untouched, protected as a state preserve. After the archaeological discoveries of he visited the cemetery where Martha Henderson was buried, having passed away peacefully in 2003. Her headstone read simply, "Beloved teacher, she brought them all home." At the Belridge Community Center, a small plaque commemorated the miracle of October 1992, when 11 children survived 3 days trapped in mountain caves through the heroic efforts of their teacher and the tireless work of search and rescue teams. That evening, Holbrook attended a reunion dinner, organized by the now-adult survivors. Timothy Ashford was a pediatrician in Denver, married with 2 children of his own. Carmen Rodriguez had become a social worker, specializing in helping traumatized children. The Brennan twins had started a wilderness survival school, teaching others the skills that they claimed had helped them survive their ordeal. None of them spoke directly about what had really happened in the depths of Devil's Peak. But as the evening wound down and old friendships were renewed, Holbrook noticed something that made him smile. They still took care of each other. After everything they'd endured, after being changed by experiences that should have broken them, they had chosen to remain fundamentally human. As he drove away from Belridge for the last time, Holbrook glanced up at Devil's Peak. For just a moment, he thought he saw a faint blue glow, emanating from somewhere deep within the mountain. But then it was gone, and he decided it was probably just his imagination. The sleepers remained in their deep places, sealed by the power of human will and the unbreakable bonds between a teacher and her students. The cycle was broken, the harvest ended, and in a small town nestled in the Colorado Rockies, children slept safely in their beds, protected by the courage of those who had come before, and the vigilance of those who would never forget the autumn when 11 children vanished into the mountain and somehow, impossibly, found their way home. The Belridge vanishing was officially closed as a case solved, though the true solution would remain classified forever. But for those who lived through it, who saw ordinary people do extraordinary things in the face of cosmic horror, the real truth was simpler and more profound than any government conspiracy. We are not alone. We are not powerless. And we never give up trying to find our way home.